All right, if you don't mind, I'm going to have a little fun here. I was watching the president's speech today as he was talking from the Rose Garden about his, once again, his Inflation Reduction Act and how it's just, he said this, go back and look at it. This is one of the best bills ever passed, if not the best. I mean, it is the cure-all. And I was actually thinking, for me, all roads lead back to Andy Griffith. But I was thinking of the episode. It was the episode with Aunt Bee and the Medicine Man when Colonel Harvey was in town selling his Alexa. So play clip number 7, please.
Now, what I offer you, my friends, is no medicine. It is far more than that. It is a tonic, an elixir to purge the body and lift the spirits, to put a light in the eye and a spring in the step, a lilt in the voice, and hope in the human heart.
That's the Inflation Reduction Act, according to the president. Does all of that and more. Okay, back to work. A report this week from the New York Times indicates that more teenage girls are seeking what has come to be called top surgery. Now, make no mistake about it, this is a double mastectomy on a child's healthy body, a minor child. That, and there are no official statistics on how many minors receive these surgeries each year, but we do know that hospitals consider these surgeries as significant revenue drivers. Now, many of the institutions aren't reporting them. They don't want to let people know what's going on. Now, the top surgery can cost as much as $12,000. Now, adolescence is a difficult time for children. But we're pushing this, as we just heard, age 2, we're confusing children, as they're questioning different things. I'm sure that a 2-year-old is not thinking about, having some kind of gender procedure. But they're getting into that pipeline. And of course, we now have limitations on the counseling, the therapy that these children can have once they say, well, a girl says, I feel like I'm a boy. Now, this doesn't even get into what they call the bottom surgeries, which we played a clip at the top of the program from Vanderbilt, where they say that can cost as much as $100,000, and it's a huge moneymaker for these hospitals. So, and not only do we have the left driving this destructive ideology, but now we have some that are trying to cash in on it. What should we make of this? How should we be responding? What do we need to do to protect our children? Join me now to discuss this is Dr. Jennifer Bauwens. She is the director of the Center for Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Dr. Bauwens, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
Okay, so I want to start. It's always important when you have conversations that you start with definition of terms, because I think that the left intentionally chooses terms to, just like we see it with legislation here in Washington, they change the definition, they pick these nice sounding terms that really are deceptive. So I want to start with, this is the broader discussion here about these types of procedures is called gender affirming care. Mm-hmm. So what is gender affirming care? Basically,
gender affirming care is both physiological and psychological. So let's just say a child goes to a therapist, and that therapist, which by the way, many codes of ethics in our nation, many professional codes of ethics in our nation support gender affirming care. So what you have is this sort of feedback loop where if you have those who are performing the physiological gender affirming care say, we want a referral from a therapist who is also in that same ideological bent, you just have people who are, no one's able to sort of see clearly because everyone is bought into this ideology. Or if they haven't bought into this ideology, they're feeling immense pressure, like what we heard from Vanderbilt University. So in sum, gender affirming care is both psychologically affirming the transgender identity that the child says that they endorse, And then you have the physiological procedures, which could include hormonal, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, like as you mentioned, top and bottom surgery, which is really a mutilation of the body.
So there's it's kind of incongruent where you're talking about affirming. Is it affirming to mutilate a human body, to take off healthy body parts, just because someone will feel good, or at least in the short term, they may feel good? That's what healthcare has become?
That is unfortunately the reality that we're working in right now. And we need to be affirming our children's God-given identity. We need to be affirming them so that they stay connected to their spirit, soul, and body, and not encourage like a sort of Gnostic gospel where there's a separation between the spirit and body. God gave us the temple that He intended us to be in because there's a calling of God on that particular sexual expression and, for lack of better terms, of that identity.
Right. I want to quote from this New York Times piece that came out this week, just kind of highlighting the top surgeries, which is the removal of breast of women, of young girls. We're talking about minors here. I'm talking about minors. And I'm going to quote from this New York Times piece. It says, much research has shown that as adults, transgender men generally benefit from top surgery. It relieves body-related distress, increases sexual satisfaction, improves overall quality of life. And then it goes on to say, a few small studies of transgender adolescents suggest similar benefits in the short term. And then it moves right along. So first off, we don't have much of a body of research to talk about the implications for minors getting these irreversible procedures. And what we do have suggests it's only beneficial in the short term.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Tony, because that also stuck out to me. And I looked at some of the studies that the New York Times is quoting in this article. And these studies one is done by one of the major transgender surgeons in the country in LA, Dr. Olson Kennedy. And she's the primary investigator in this study, and then which should give you pause to begin with. But you look at the quality of research that's coming out. These are qualitative studies. So if you don't know what that means, basically, that's what you would do at the beginning of a research agenda when you're still learning about a certain topic. This isn't something that a method that you would use to, do a heart surgery or any kind of physiological procedure. This is an initial investigation, and these are the types of studies that they're quoting and saying, there's a small body of evidence that shows that these procedures are useful for what they term chest dysphoria. In other words, used to support cutting off healthy breast in adolescents. So it's really disturbing that the quality of evidence that's being used to prop up these gender clinics, we've never seen anything like this before in our country, at least. And then the other thing I would say is in the Olson Kennedy study, they cite almost 100% people in the study said that they were satisfied with the surgery. So when you look at other interventions that are used to treat psychological issues, that's a phenomenal number. That never happens. I've never heard of almost 100% success when it comes to a psychological condition being treated with some intervention. But you see this over and over again in the transgender literature, or the research studies, where they have these phenomenal numbers that just don't line up with what we know in the rest of the psychological literatures.
Right.
But it's quite something.
It's another red flag that
Yeah.
this is a political agenda that's being driven, and as you said, there is tremendous pressure upon professionals to either get in line. In fact, we saw this at the situation in Vanderbilt, where I don't think we have the audio of this, but Daily Wire host Matt Walsh uncovered a lot of the shocking details and wrote extensively about it. And one of the experts there on staff, one of the professors at Vanderbilt, Ellen Wright Clayton, said basically, if you have a problem with this, you need to go someplace else, because this is happening and you better get in line. And that's happening to professionals all across this country. So you can really no longer trust, I hate to say this, but you can no really longer trust the doctor, the professional, because they are having to, or they're willingly marching to the beat of the left's drum. So I want to ask you this question, Jennifer, because before we run out of time, I want to have this discussion. At the Pray Vote Stand Summit in Atlanta, Georgia, a couple weeks ago, you did a panel discussion on this, and there's been a tremendous amount of response to that, because parents are trying to figure out, all right, my kids are being, they're coming home, they're questioning their gender, they're being indoctrinated with this at school, in the media. What do I do? So help those parents kind of get their equilibrium on this and a way forward.
Yeah, and there's no one broad answer that I think is a one-size-fits-all, but one thing that we can say is, sorry, I'm losing my earpiece here, is that...
Yeah, I want to make sure you can hear me.
Yeah, that's right. Is it's important as others are affirming a false identity, that we need to go out of our way as parents and as a community of believers to affirm our young people in who they are and really call out the God-given bents that they have and celebrate who they are. I don't think we can do that enough just to be an encouragement. I mean, that's one really simple thing, but also I think it's just so important to remember that usually kids who are the most vulnerable to this, there are other underlying issues going on. There's lies, or there's things that they're believing about themselves. I think at the Pray Vote Stand Summit, Kathy Grace Duncan did a great job of sharing some of the things that where lies came in that caused her to believe that it wasn't safe to be a woman. And it's going to be different for everyone who might be susceptible to this ideology, but just to remember as a parent or as someone who's supporting a young person, that there's always a reason, and that transing a child is never the answer.
And the evidence would show that most of these children will grow out of this if they have the support structure and they're given the encouragement to go through through adolescence. But then also there's evidence that shows that a lot of these children, as they grow older, 5 or 10 years down the road, regret these surgeries.
Yeah, that's right. And there isn't enough data on this. There isn't enough investigation to show that people do regret these particular surgeries. And what a horrible thing to introduce to a child that's trying to figure their life out and trying to figure out who they want to be and how they want to spend their life growing up. And then you throw this in the mix. Or you add something like abuse. What a confusing situation to be faced with.
Before we run out of time, one final question for you. Is this something that our churches need to be addressing? Pastors need to be speaking to this, because if there is not a standard of truth that addresses this, children are going to be drawn in by what they're hearing in school, what they're hearing in the media.
Yeah, absolutely. We, as the church, we really need to be alert to this. We can think that this is happening in some strange school out in San Francisco. But the reality is that this ideology has permeated so many of our universities. So what they're producing in the fields of education, well, every field, every field's been touched by this ideology. And we need to equip our people to be ready to face this ideology with love and truth. And I believe we can see this turn. We're already seeing the evidence of this turning.
All right, Jennifer Bauwens, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.